What has to happen for an issue like the Taliban to make it onto your plate and then actually turn into something that starts to grab your colleagues as well, to create a growing sense in the Senate?
Well, I think it's one of the great challenges that the United States faces in the early decades of the 21st century, the ability to have leadership with the wisdom to determine when it's appropriate to say yes to requests for intervention and action, and when it's necessary to say no. It arises, of course, from our unique status as not only the preeminent military power in the world, but also a preeminent military power with a high degree of moral authority. That is a status that has occurred rarely in history, and it imposes upon us, I think, a very special obligation. There is, of course, no single formula, no textbook answer to your question, how do matters arise. You posed a question in your opening remarks about the disparate responses by the United States to the crises in the Balkans and in Central Africa. With respect to the Taliban, it seems evident from just the remarks that have been said so far, and probably everyone in the audience agrees, that we are shocked and we should condemn. But beyond that, there is a very limited range of actions in which we can engage. I doubt there's a person in this room who would say that the United States should engage in some type of military activity to reverse the current events in Afghanistan or any place else under those circumstances. I think that the only credible rationale for making these decisions, and it is of necessity a general one subject to a wide degree of interpretation, is first and foremost whether it affects in any way our vital national interests. That's a very broad and elastic phrase that's been expanded or contracted by various presidents to serve their immediate political purposes. The second reality is, and I don't think I'm going to be shocked by it, is that an important factor is whether there is a domestic political content to the issue. There are, where you have several million Americans of a particular heritage, an issue has a much greater resonance than when there are very few Americans of that heritage. And so we are a diverse country with roots all around the world, and of course the degree of interest that we have follows in part from the domestic content.
Well, let's stipulate that the Afghan-American community is small.
Right.
And even such size as it is, it's not very influential in other ways. How does it clear that other bar of the vital national interest? And how is that decision arrived at?
Well, again, that's a matter of individual judgment. My own view is that Jean Kirkpatrick some years ago made a statement, which she's repeated earlier at the dinner, that we have an interest and an obligation in encouraging democracy and free markets around the world, because I believe that America does well where democracy does well. And I think that it would be a profound error to think that we could survive in our current status if we were to draw along our own shores and say everyone for themselves and we're not going to take any action for or against democracy. In fact, I think one of the great actions by the United States is one that is rarely mentioned by current analysts, but I think in historians' eyes will be seen as a significant turning point in human history, and that was the Helsinki Accords in 1976, signed by then President Gerald Ford, supported on a bipartisan basis in this country for some time, which established for the first time the international legal premise that there is a right to intervene across national borders if minimum standards of internationally recognized human rights are violated within a country. Now, again, those are very general terms. They're very susceptible to expansion or contraction depending on your point of view. But I think we have to be very careful not to fall into the trap of believing that every problem in the world is an exclusively American problem requiring an exclusively American solution. For most of this country's history, it was our belief that we would do best to lead by example. It was, in fact, only in this century, during the administration of President Wilson, that the United States began to change its policy to one that was of more active intervention, not just leading by example. And I think we have to be very careful about that. I believe that the principal source of American influence in the world is not primarily economic or military, although those are essential, economic strength and the willingness to use military power where necessary and appropriate. But I believe that the principal source of our influence in the world lies in our ideals, the founding principles of our Constitution and our way of life, the primacy of individual liberty, the notion of equal justice before law, and the other things that we've come to believe in as American values. I believe, for example, that the United States was a great nation long before it was a great military power, and long before it was the most powerful economy in the world. So I think we have to be careful to be true to our ideals, not overextend ourselves, use international institutions and regional compacts more to try to extend democracy and free markets around the world.